Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Santaspirt. I'm the chief of the Army Mad Scientist team here out of the Transformation and Training Command's G2 at Fort Eustis in Virginia. Very excited to have everyone here today. As always, this is the fourth speaker series that we've done since we brought this back, and we're very excited to have Colonel Retired John Antal with us. John's been a great friend of the program for many years. He was the one that kind of first broke what was happening in the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War to us, kind of explaining the use of unmanned aerial systems, the top attack, a lot of things that we kind of take for granted now as kind of normal. John was on when they were first happening and first changing the way that we look at warfare. So John's going to talk to us today for 45 minutes. And we'll have the chance at the end of this to do a question and answer session with him, which I think is one of the coolest things that we can do here. Is we get these experts on, and we're allowed to have that kind of one-on-one dialogue with them. So please do take advantage of that. There is a question and answer button on your Zoom toolbar there that Rachel will be monitoring. You can also put questions in the chat. Feel free to use the chat as a way to kind of keep the discussion going while we're having while John's doing his talk. And we will have this recorded, so the video will be available afterwards, so you can go back and rewatch, or if you weren't able to make it, you can send it to folks who weren't able to make the session live. So please do stay tuned to the Mad Scientist Laboratory, madsciblog.t2com.army.mil for updates on that and updates on what we're learning here at the Mad Scientist Initiative. Without further ado, let me tell you about John, and then we'll get started. So John Antal is a best-selling author and military analyst dedicated to developing leaders and inspiring service. With 17 books and numerous articles on leadership, history, and warfighting, he's shaping the conversation on future conflict. His military experience spans 30 years in the U.S. Army as an armor and cavalry officer. He's a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, airborne and ranger qualified, and an expert infantryman's badge recipient. Commanded tank and cavalry units from platoon to regiment and served on division, corps, and multinational staffs. Distinguished graduate of both the Command and General Staff College and the Army War College, and also served as special assistant to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and G3 of the 3rd Armored Corps. So John, without further ado, I will hand it over to you. We can begin your talk, and the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate the kind introduction, and I look forward to trying to offer everyone here today something they can learn from, and a diamond maybe that you can put in your pocket so that you can train better, you can plan better, and you can lead better. All right, first let me share screen. And Matt, I'm going to go to full mode here. Tell me we're good to go.
Good to go, sir.
All right. I'm going to talk today about drone dominance and how we need to be looking up to seize the new high ground of warfare. Now, most of you, all of you, I assume, have been thinking about this very important subject for a long time. So I really appreciate your focus, and I look forward to your questions. Now, I've given over 800 presentations since January 2021. I was on the Army Science Board for about 4 years, and then started doing these presentations to any team or unit that wanted to learn and understand. So if your team, your unit, your group wants to have me speak to them in person or by MS Teams or even Zoom in this case, all you have to do is contact me. I don't charge for U.S. military at all. I do this because I care about you all. I have no affiliation. I don't work for anyone. I'm a soldier for life. So I want us to learn together. And everything in this presentation is unclassified. So I can give this to any group, anytime, almost off any means. So we're going to talk about drone dominance, and this is part 1 of my drone dominance capstone presentation. I start off with a quote that I borrowed from Arthur C. Clarke, and you can see it here. Any military technology fielded 2 generations ahead of the enemy and employed before he can adapt is indistinguishable from magic. We need to make the magic so that we can win and our soldiers survive and the enemy is defeated rapidly. Now at the bottom you see a number 80%. Remember that number. We'll talk about it later. 80%. Now this is what the briefing will be about. We'll talk about the new reality of warfare. We'll then talk about how to achieve drone dominance. Because we declared drone dominance in July of last year, but achieving drone dominance, we need a good plan for that and good thinking on it. And then third, what must be done? What can we do now and what must be done to move us forward into the future so we stay at the leading and the cutting edge of how war fighting is conducted? First, the new reality of warfare. We'll talk about how war has changed, how MDO is evolving, and the LAL and the SASL, the land, air, littoral, and the sea, air, subsurface littoral. And we'll talk about those as understanding the sort of the geometry of the new warfare. So, how has war changed in the past 6 years? In 2020, the Nagorno-Karabakh War occurred, and it's now almost ancient history. The Azerbaijanis won against the Armenians in a 44-day decisive victory. It was a tremendous fight on the Azerbaijanis' part. And most Americans, most military folks, and in our leaders in government didn't pay attention to this war much because they're two small countries and they didn't come to our level of care. But it's really something we should study. Anytime there is a military decisive victory in 44 days, we should pay attention. That's rare in history. And secondly, because the Azerbaijanis were able to use technology to their advantage, they were able to make the Armenian response almost fruitless. So almost anything the Armenians didn't work. So this is an important war to study. And in 2020, what we learned is drones and loitering munitions are making a difference, and they're making a big difference in the battle space in many ways. Then in 2022, we saw the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And with that invasion, we saw battle after battle that we can learn from. And you should be learning from those. In fact, every one of you as a leader should have 1, 2, 3 case studies from the Ukrainian war in your hip pocket that you could use for training and teaching and coaching of your leaders. And then we saw in 2023 not only the Ukrainian-Russia war continue and intensify, where the transparent battle space became obvious and there are no sanctuaries anywhere. But we also saw war erupt in the Middle East with the attack on Israel and how the IDF responded to that. And we need to learn from both the Ukrainians and the Israeli Defense Forces because they have a lot to teach us. Now watch this video.
Ukrainian drones are methodically eliminating abandoned Russian armored vehicles scattered across the battlefield. These silent hunters descend from the sky, leaving behind nothing but heaps of charred metal. A tank engulfed in flames stands as one of the most striking examples of their precision. Elsewhere, another armored vehicle moved forward confidently. Draped in camouflage nets and fitted with protective grills. Yet as it advanced toward the front line, a drone dove straight at it. The result? Nothing left but smoke and debris. A second armored carrier approaching from the opposite direction managed to survive artillery fire. Even mines couldn't stop it. But when a Ukrainian operator directed his drone toward the vehicle, the outcome was inevitable. A devastating explosion. Thousands of fragments scattered across the field. Likely seeing this destruction, Russian troops decided to retreat rather than press forward. Another drone approached its target, and moments later, another explosion. Fueled by the ammunition inside. Next came a Russian tank. A mine layer had helped it reach the middle of a field, but a drone above had already locked onto its position. The tank's navigation system was disabled, and the crew abandoned it in panic. Too late, another drone strike turned the tank into a fireball. As another Russian tank passed through a ruined village, it too became a target. The UAV hit it squarely. When Ukrainian forces inspected the aftermath, The tank's massive turret was found several meters away, half buried in the dirt. Witnessing this, the crew of a second tank also fled their vehicle, and they were right to do so. The Ukrainian drone hovered silently, its operator carefully selecting the weakest point. Seconds later, an explosion lit up the sky. The turret flew into the air. In another scene, Ukrainian drones continued their wreck cleanup.
So the Russians have lost a tremendous amount of armored vehicles in the war, and the amount of troops that they've lost, over 1 million casualties, is staggering. So we need to pay attention to this. You need to be watching these videos because every one of these videos teaches you something about how drones attack armored vehicles, how they attack troops. And I could show you hundreds of these that I've watched and used to train troops with. And I will tell you that some of the drone footage of them attacking individual soldiers goes on and on and on. And you get the idea that more and more soldiers in Ukraine and also in the Middle East are being killed now by drones. In fact, most of our casualties in Epic Fury were from drones, some from ballistic missiles, but mostly from drones. So we need to really pay attention to this. You know this. So what are you doing? What are you doing to learn about it? And what are you doing to prepare for it? Now, the war continued. 2024 was a time where the drone warfare really accelerated. We saw more and more drones used in the battle space and making a tremendous difference, particularly after the 2023 Ukrainian great counteroffensive that they had prepared for failed so miserably. They were trained by us to attack in the old way, and they had died in the old way because drones had changed things. When you have a kill box that drones saturate, you cannot maneuver. You have no freedom of maneuver. So we need to think differently. We need to look up. And then in 2025, we saw some remarkable things with deep strikes with drones, and you know about these. One was the Operation Spider's Web in June of 2025, where the Ukrainians launched drones across Russia, deep into some areas in Siberia, even to attack the Russian bomber fleet and take out a significant portion of the bomber fleet. And these drones were operating from commercial semi-trailers that the roofs opened and the drones flew out that were nearby, well within range of those small drones, and they attacked those bombers that were basically undefended. Imagine if that happened in the United States. Could that happen in the United States? Would the Chinese or someone else who wants to win in a surprise attack do that to us? The Israelis also had a chance to do this in June of 2025 during Operation Rising Lion, where they operated drones from inside Iran and were able to attack significant targets, including leadership. So this is something we need to really understand because the ability to move significant striking power with drones surreptitiously, way behind we would consider maybe rear areas, which are not safe. There are no sanctuaries anymore. This is something that is real and something we must plan for. And in 2026, this year, of course, we see now more drones being used, more networking of drones. During the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War, the drones really didn't talk to each other. It was one-to-one humans operating the drones, talking to each other and showing each other video feed and operating where the human took over the role of what now AI is beginning to take over. So now we're in the early operational emergence of an AI-enabled robotic warfare, where we now see UGVs, ground vehicles, and UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, FPV drones and ISR drones and bomber drones and others operating together in Ukraine. And Ukraine has done a tremendous job of putting this whole thing together basically on a shoestring. How can they do that so well? And where are we as far as what they can do? Now, let's go on to MDO involved. Multi-domain operations, as you are well aware, has 5 main domains. It has land, sea, air, space, and cyber. Each one of these is a physical place. Land you stand on. Sea you put ships on or under. Air you fly over. Space you can occupy. And cyber is anywhere there is an electronic device connected to an internet connection. And if you have that, you now have the domains of war. But what I want to do in this diagram is highlight some areas that we need to understand differently. First, look at where the yellow arrow is on the left, pointing toward the LAL, the land air littoral, and then the sea air subsurface littoral. The littoral is a boundary between two areas. So the LAL, the land air littoral, is the boundary between the land and the air. We don't have a name for this yet. We need to pick a name and define it. I have used the term land air littoral after a lot of thinking about what's the best name. And for the sea air subsurface littoral. We need to start thinking about who dominates that and how you control it. Because if you do not, the enemy will. The next is the air, which is controlled by the Air Force normally and also missiles, but these guys come and go. One of the interesting thing about the LAL and the SASL is that with drones, you can actually have a persistence presence. It is difficult to have a persistent presence with air. You can have a constant combat air patrol, yes, but airplanes basically fly in and fly out. Missiles fly in and do their job. But the drones that we now have the capability of creating and that Ukraine has can loiter or land and wait until they find their target and then pop up and attack them. That persistence changes a lot. You need to think about that. And then above the air, there's a little space called the stratosphere. Now, the stratosphere right now isn't used much by our forces. The Chinese, of course, have put balloons in the stratosphere. In fact, I think they had a tour of America not too long ago. But our challenge is this: the stratosphere is something that we need to dominate. And we could dominate it relatively cheaply using balloons that have on them ISR packages and all sorts of other things. The reason I say this is because as you start thinking through drone operations in the future, you need a better Wi-Fi signal, you need a better radio signal to those drones, better command and control signal to the drones. And if you're in the stratosphere with that capability, you're much closer than you are from space, even in low Earth orbit. So having space is great, and space is very important, and the Starlink systems that we have in Star Shield are vital, and the Chinese are nervous about all of them, and so are the Russians. But what we need to do is think about also how we could operate from the stratosphere, because it is an area that we're not operating on. This is an Air Force job, but it is something to think about. So the next time you talk to the Air Force in any of these operations that you're in and plans that you're in and exercises you're conducting, ask them what they got operating in the stratosphere. But the main point for us is the land-air littoral. As the U.S. Army, the land-air littoral is that space above the ground where drones operate, and we need to understand how to dominate it. Now, we need a definition for the land-air littoral and the sea-air subsurface littoral to be precise. Socrates, the great Greek philosopher, said that all understanding starts with definition. So all understanding starts with definition. If you don't define it, you don't know what you're talking about. So the land-air littoral, this is what it is. The LAL is the decisive vertical battle space immediately above the ground in land warfare. And the sea-air subsurface littoral, the SASL, is the equivalent layer above the sea and low underwater space. So it's not only above the sea, but it's also on the surface and underwater. So the number of dimensions that the SASL has is even more complex. But as soldiers, we need to understand how to seize the LAL, because you have three conditions in any case. One, the enemy controls it. They right now have drone superiority over the LAL. If the enemy has drone superiority over the LAL, you are in a very bad situation because they are hunting you and you are trying to survive. If it is contested, you have a situation much like we have in Ukraine in many cases, where both sides are trying to gain superiority over the LAL, and both sides still are denied freedom of maneuver. So in the first case, you have no freedom of maneuver. In the contested case, you have very limited freedom of maneuver. If you have drone superiority, though, and your drones are able to operate in the LAL, you now, and the enemies are not, you now have freedom of maneuver. And we need to think of that from now on, because in any operation that we do, who's in charge of seizing the LAL. And if it's no one, well, that's a problem. So let's go on to two, achieving drone dominance. In July 2025, the Secretary of War announced drone dominance, and he mentioned how the United States of America is going to develop the capability and inspire industry and rapid field this ability to fight in the drone era. This is very important. The next is drone superiority. We'll talk about the importance of the digital architecture, and then how we're moving from a kill chain to a kill web, which all of you are probably very familiar with, but let's just go over it. So first, drone dominance. There is no such thing as air dominance. There is no such thing as sea dominance as far as a military term meaning something other than a desire to dominate by the nation. So the United States of America long ago said, we want to be a sea power. So we want to have sea dominance. They said, we want to have air dominance as well. And so we made the best Air Force in the world. So we've been able to get air dominance and sea dominance, which are not military terms. Those are just kind of conditions. For air superiority, for instance, for air, you have air parity, air superiority, and air supremacy. And even though we use this term air dominance sometimes loosely and sloppily, there's no military term for air dominance. So the same for drones. Drone dominance is a national condition. It is a strategic national condition. And it involves human intelligence multiplied by artificial intelligence multiplied by production scale to achieve it. And it's the nation's capacity to build, sustain, replace, and improve large numbers of unmanned and robotic systems at scale. Drone dominance sets you up for success, and you have to achieve it at scale. We're receiving thousands of drones in our military this year. The Ukrainians are making millions. President Zelensky said that there'll be 7 to 10 million this year. We're making thousands. Now, how many drones should we have? First, we should understand what we need, and we should understand what drone dominance is, and we should understand that it's a national strategic condition, and that we need to set up the conditions in order to produce at scale the drones that we will need in combat scenarios. Now, this then moves toward drone superiority. If you have drone dominance, in the sense that you're able to have the strategic condition that makes enough drones across the spectrum of drone capabilities that you need, then what you can do is you can gain drone superiority. And again, there's three conditions that you have to fight through. You have where the enemy has it, which is very bad, where it's contested, which is still no freedom of maneuver, and then drone superiority. So in every one of our plans, in every one of our war games, in all of our doctrine, we should talk about who is responsible for achieving drone superiority over a particular battle space. And we can designate that battle space in different ways. And I have some options on how to do that. I call them ground strike zones or sea strike zones. And being able to designate those three-dimensional cubes, those three-dimensional objects over there, like a kill box, but more expanded with capabilities that are designed to coordinate the drone attack so you can get drone superiority. So to gain drone superiority needs to be our goal. We need to sense first. We need to disrupt the enemy networks. We need to kill the archer, because if you keep shooting at the arrows, you'll be doing it forever. You need to strike precisely. You need to protect friendly forces, which is a full spectrum protection effort. And we need to talk about how all of that will give us control of the LAL and deny that LAL, the land, air, littoral, to the enemy. But you won't do it if you don't plan for it and have forces that can do it. So who's in charge and what force do they have to seize the LAL? And if that's not in our plans, then it's haphazard. And we'll end up taking casualties we shouldn't take and maybe losing freedom of maneuver when we need it. So if we're going to detect, decide, disrupt, and defeat the enemy, we need to think through how to seize the LAL. And it needs to be part of every plan. And every unit, all the way down to platoon level, to squad level, needs to think about the LAL and how they're going to fight to control their battle space right above them. Here's that 80% number. Think about this. Here's drone superiority in action. In January, President Zelensky of Ukraine said that more than 80% of the targets, the Russians, are destroyed by drones. And they're almost all made domestically. And in this last year, meaning 2025, 819,737 targets were hit by drones. Now that number is actually increasing this year in ratio. And many have said that the percentage of Russian soldier systems and positions destroyed by drones is in the 90s. It is replacing artillery as the decisive arm. It is replacing artillery as the king of battle. And that's pretty amazing. But the precision of these weapons and their low cost is what's changing everything. Their precision and their ability to be made in great numbers. If Ukraine can do this, and of course they're pressed under war conditions, then we should be able to do it as well. And we should be able to think through how we would do it, because we won't do it the way Ukraine does. We will not fight the way Ukraine does, and we will not be in the same situation as the Ukrainian situation on the Donbass, or anywhere in the Ukrainian-Russian front, more than likely. But we must learn from it, and we have to learn a lot from it. The number of troops killed, the number of artillery systems destroyed, and all of this, and the number of ships destroyed just in June of this last month by one unit, the Magyar birds of the Ukrainian army, is unbelievable. The slaughter that they did of artillery systems in June was incredible. They basically knocked out 3 artillery brigades of the Russian army along the front. And this last few weeks, I know all of you have been studying how the Ukrainian drones have been hitting ships in the Sea of Azov and knocking out their oil potential to be able to move. And these are oil tankers. They're not the huge oil tankers like in the Strait of Hormuz. They're a little bit more medium to small, but they've knocked out a tremendous number. And this is something that is amazing because Ukraine does not have a navy. Yet they've denied the Black Sea and now the Sea of Azov to Russia, which has a navy. We need to pay attention to that. So machines calculate, but humans still command. And we need to build persistent kill webs for decisive overmatch for our future fights. Now, drone superiority also requires, very importantly, a digital architecture. The Ukrainians and the Israelis, the IDF, have a digital architecture for their sense and strike in real-time drone systems. So they're able to connect the ISR information from all their drones, the sense and strike drones and the ISR drones, and they are able to take this and fuse this into a digital architecture that gives them tremendous advantages in the battle space. It gives them, down to the squad level in some cases, the ability to fight in real time, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The ability to see over the hill. Our squad leaders don't have quite that same capability. You can talk about the Black Hornet and small drones and all this, but we routinely do not have, for instance, a drone feed going into our Bradley and tank crews and telling them what's downrange. For instance, why don't we go through tank gunnery or Bradley gunnery or even infantry gunnery with drone feeds coming to our leaders so that they can direct fire properly? Why don't we know what's going beyond the hill? That's how we need to fight in the future. So this digital architecture is really important. And if you've never heard of the Delta or the Kropova system or the Sayad system, which the Israelis use, you should study these because these are ground up, built up from basically the ground level digital architecture systems that cost a fraction of what we're paying for JADC2, and it works. Now, we can make our systems work, but we haven't yet integrated them to the lowest level. So, they're top down, and that's an issue that we need to think through. Now, real-time data fusion is crucial. Warfare is now about real-time data fusion. If you're not getting a real-time feed of your enemy, you're fighting 20th century warfare. 21st century warfare is fighting in real time. And we need AI-enabled battle management. We need more and more of this. Now, you see this already with the Maven system in the Gulf, in the Persian Gulf right now, in the Strait of Hormuz, with U.S. forces using Maven Smart System to basically tie in all the sensors and shooters and hit targets. We're doing that at almost the operational level, tactical to operational level, but we need to lower that level even smaller, and we can't use Maven for that. We need a little bit different system so that squad leaders and platoon leaders and company commanders and battalion commanders will have this at their elbow and be able to use it. And then we need these really resilient distributed networks. Obviously, if the network can be jammed, destroyed, or overtaken, or compromised, hacked, you have a problem. So we have to make sure that we have the safeguards against that, and that we train for degraded mode in case they go out, because there's ways to take it out, as you know, EMP and other things, where no matter how many safeguards you had, it doesn't matter if there's no electrons flowing. He who controls the electrons controls the fight. Now, we're moving from kill chain to kill web, and I just mentioned the Maven Smart system, which we're using very effectively in Epic Fury and what we're doing in the Strait of Hormuz. Most of you know the kill chain very well. When I was a young officer, I was able to call in mortar fire and do that effectively, and that became one of the skills a young officer had to have. But we're moving from kill chain to now kill web, where AI is enabling us to be able to link all of the sensed targets, all the targets that have been seen by every sensor out in the battle space, and link that automatically to target shooters, that can see and kill those targets. So they're linked automatically to shooters that are in range and shooters that can kill those targets, and then it's a matter of execution. That saves tremendous time, and that AI kill web is what we are moving toward. So we need to be very precise in our language and not talk about a kill chain as a kill web. A kill web is AI enabled. So if you're using the Maven Smart system, you're using a proto kill web, a beginning of a kill web. We still need to do some work on this to get this to work. We'll still have human command, of the kill web, not control. We'll have human command of the kill web. The machine will calculate, but we will command and we will execute the attacks. Next, what must be done? Okay, we have to fight in real time. We need to understand what distributed mission command and distributed logistics are and execute these if we're going to survive and win. We need to also understand how to control drones, because one of the things is the Ukrainians control drones differently than we do, and we need to figure out how we're going to do it. And then we need to talk about all arms combat, which is the evolution of combined arms. First, fighting in real time. I've already mentioned this is the difference between a 20th century army and a 21st century army. If you don't plan, prep, and execute in real time and be able to fight in real time, well, you're doing it as we did in the last century. Right now, our training does not include fighting in real time, and it should. Maybe in some cases you're doing it, and that's great, because we need to move more and more toward that arena. But what I see when I go visit the force and when I talk to leaders is they're not being able to do this because we don't have the drones up all the time. For instance, I tell them, do you have a blue drone, ISR drone, flying over your training in the field when you're in the field, 24/7 to see what you look like so you can use this for after action reviews and what happens when you actually do maneuvers? The answer is no, at least not often or not enough. It should be all the time, particularly in training. And there's all excuses. There's many reasons why we can't do this, we can't do that. And I tell them, quite frankly, quit telling me what you can't do. Tell me what you can do and do it, because we need to be able to fight in real time. So a tank crew going down table 6 qualification should in fact have a real time feed from a drone feeding into that tank commander, maybe even into the gunner, so they can see what's going on behind the hill or where the next target engagement needs to be. That's how we win the next war, by being able to fight in real time. And this isn't even in our lexicon in many cases. So we really need to think this through. You guys are bright out there. You'll figure out better ways than I ever have. But we need to fight in real time, because the speed of information that is now available to us allows us to do this. The Ukrainians can do this, and I can show you videos where they do this. The Israelis do this. We need to do it. And with the persistent sensing and the compressed decision-making time and the need for rapid action. We need to put all this together, okay? And we need to be able to do it in a way that our fighters from squad level all the way up have a good situation awareness of this battle space and done in a way that doesn't cognitively overload them. We can complain about there's too much information coming down, or we can figure out an AI system that works out to make it easier. It would be very valuable to be able to have the ability to say, give me 3 courses of action, and this is what I'm thinking, and it does it almost instantaneously, and you pick from one and execute. There's a lot of things we can do with AI because it's simple. It's artificial narrow intelligence that allows us to sort of take data from all over the places, do pattern recognition, and sort it. We can do that, and we need to have those kind of systems with us. And they can be operated many different ways, but and presented in many different ways. For instance, you could have something on your wrist where you're looking at it, or you could have glasses that would give you the AI capability, but still be able to see out through the real world and fight. I mean, all of these things are possible now, and we just need to start thinking ahead because fighting in real time, that is the key. Now, distributed mission command. We understand mission command kind of. If you ask the average U.S. Army officer to give you a definition of mission command, you might be amused at what you get. I do this all the time, and they're very difficult. They have a difficult time sometimes describing what mission command is. If you're going to teach a culture, there should be no hesitation. You should have a definition in your heart and in your head. And so we need to practice that better. But distributed mission command is one order of magnitude higher. And what this is the ability to execute mission command geographically dispersed with resilient networks that share awareness, and we have to delegate decision making as needed. We have to employ a mesh network to do this, one where if one piece goes out, it automatically self-adjusts to the next piece. So imagine a battalion command setup. We need more nodes in the command node, and we need them dispersed greater. And we need them with the ability to be resilient under artillery fire. So armor protection makes sense. Now, you saw a bunch of armored vehicles destroyed on the battle space, and some people say, well, that means the tank is dead. Well, the way that we fight tanks now won't work. But the way that we can fight combined arms, i.e. also the new one, all arms combat in the future, could work. And we need to think that way, and we need to start moving toward that. Greater dispersion. More robots in the battle space. I can see a tank platoon someday that has 1 or 2 human-operated vehicles with a bunch of robotic systems. That's where we need to be headed very quickly. Now, problems can be had. Technology's hard. Technology is not our simple answer to every problem, but we need to use the tools necessary. I mean, I'm all for understanding how to fight degraded, and if we have to fight with knives, that's one thing. But I don't want to show up at a rock fight, when the other guy has lasers. So we need to be able to use the best technology that we can grab our hands on and then work back from there. Now, distributed mission command embraces the mission command philosophy. But what it does is it disperses it, it hardens it, it puts a greater emphasis on mission command on the move, and it allows us to operate without staff co-location. And you say, you got to be kidding me. Well, just imagine, in distributed mission command, if you put all of your staff officers and commanders together in a command post, and I'm the enemy, I will move heaven and hell to kill you. And you can see this over and over and over again in every war that's been fighting in the last 6 years and before, actually. But certainly in the last 6 years. And in Ukraine, Ukrainian headquarters, Russian headquarters have been annihilated. And they've learned their lesson. They don't do this anymore. They don't get together in tents. And if you're in a tent or some kind of a, sick-up arrangement or something that we have now, and you're in one of those, and that's it, that's a target that's waiting to be hammered. And the target that sticks out will get hammered. There are no sanctuaries. You can't go farther behind the lines. You could be in the United States and they could hit you. I mean, they could hit you with a spider web operation. They could hit you anywhere within the operational area that you're in if you're in Europe or in the Pacific. You cannot assume that you're going to be in a safe sanctuary because of distance or nighttime. and you can't use tents for headquarters. So we have to be smarter about this. We have to disperse, and it's hard, really hard, but it's even harder if we don't try and don't practice. So we've got to get this going. So think about how hard it is to do distributed mission command and execute mission command, maybe on the move from an armored vehicle, or at least a wheeled vehicle that has some armor, without the need of staff co-location. And that's where we need to move toward. And if you say that's too hard, can't do it, then just imagine how hard it is to reconstitute a battalion, a brigade, or a division headquarters. You kill everyone in a division headquarters, how long will it take you to reconstitute that? Think about it. Now, distributed logistics is the same issue. Our logistics won't work. We can't do convoys anymore. We can't do big supply dumps. If you want to see what happens to convoys and supply dumps, just study Ukraine. The Russian supply dumps, the Russian convoys are annihilated. Same for Ukrainian. The Russians are good at doing that too. So distributed logistics is an emerging concept that involves resilient, dispersed, mobile, and massed sustainment network designed to survive within a transparent, lethal battle space. So what does that mean? It means we've got to figure out how to disperse. We've got to get really much smarter with our logistics folks. And this is a problem because they spend most of their time supporting maneuver forces and training. And how much time do they actually have to train properly? Now, they should be training while they're doing that, but you know as well as I do that if an individual truck operator can maneuver and do and read a map and go from point A to point B, even when GPS is out, that would be a great ability. We can't do convoys anymore. We can't do large supply dumps. So distributed logistics is going to happen. And if we don't do it, we're going to be forced into it once the war starts. So let's start thinking about it now. And we also have to figure out how to do infiltration logistics. Now, this is hard stuff. This is really hard stuff. But we need to be able to think about how to use robotic systems to move stuff forward in smaller packets, because our robotic systems will only be able to go so fast with carrying heavy loads. So imagine a vampire-like Ukrainian drone that can carry up to maybe 40 pounds. You know, how much fuel can that be? Not much. So we've got to figure out how to do refueling, how to do resupply, how to do medical evacuation. We will not get helicopters out to the front line to move people back. You know, what do you have for medical evacuation? You take 30, 40 casualties, what are you going to do? How are you going to get these folks back? And we also need to be able to, when it comes to the medical part, which is part of my part 2 of the drone dominance presentation, we need to figure out how to turn the golden hour into a golden day so we can put people in some kind of a medical stasis for as long as possible, because we're not going to get them out fast. And they're going to die if we don't. So all of these things have to be thought through, but distributed logistics is the key, and the answers to it have yet to be solved. So we have to go through and study this and war game this. Now, I mentioned this idea of distributed logistics infiltration. The concept of logistics infiltration, again, is not a bunch of convoys. And of course, wars are fought on road networks. If you look at what's happening in Ukraine, the cities and the little towns and the villages and the hamlets, these all control road junctions, and that's why they're important. So being able to control the road network is crucial. Well, with some robotic systems, we don't need roads. We can use the drones. So for smaller efforts, we can use drones. Right now, the Ukrainians are infiltrating forces forward, and they're carrying very little ammo, food, and fuel. And then once they occupy a position, they are resupplied by drone with those things. Now that works for infantry infiltration. We've got a bigger challenge when you start thinking about how to refuel a tank. Back in the Land Before Time, when I was a battalion commander in Korea, we would do a refuel on the move, which basically means we would drive up to a refueling vehicle and quickly get a quick shot of fuel and try to refuel rapidly and then keep going. Those are targets that the enemy will be searching for. You know, fuelers are prime targets. 3 or 4 tanks next to a fueler is a prime target. We have to figure out how we're going to do this under constant observation by enemy drones. And that's why we have to win the land, air, littoral and seize it so we can gain freedom of maneuver and freedom of logistical support. Now, there's a rapid shift, as you're well aware, to autonomous drones. There have been three eras in the last decade, and maybe a little longer, but the idea of remote control era, I mean, this could go back as far as the Goliath in World War II, which was a UGV used by the Germans, no kidding. A demolition, basically a tracked mine that the Germans were able to use with wire control. But where the remote control era will be used forever by someone, it'll always be there. But this is an era where it is one person controlling the drone and moving the drone every way that it wants to turn or move. Then we move into the semi-autonomous transition, and you saw this basically emerge in the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War, where the Israeli-made drones called Harrops and Orbiters were able to basically fly toward the target by just a quick designation on a console, do it almost automatically, loiter over the target automatically, and then when the operator said go ahead and attack, the Harrop would look at the targets that are available underneath, and the orbiter would also look at targets and hand that back to the human operator, and the human operator would then give the Harrop more information, and the loitering munition could come down and destroy the Armenian artillery, tanks, positions, whatever. And I can show you video after video of how these devastating attacks were first hunting air defense systems, then command and control systems, and all sorts of jamming and other kind of radar systems, and then artillery, and then tanks, and then armored vehicles, then trucks of all kinds, and then troops. Now, I said that the war, second Nagorno-Karabakh war, took 44 days. And the Azerbaijanis, after about day 12, were hunting troops because they were running out of targets. So they had a lot of drones. They had a lot of very precise drones. They had these drones that were semi-autonomous, and they were able to freeze the battlefield, stop the Armenians from moving, and basically put them in a state where they received such battle shock that they surrendered. Now, the next era that we're in right now and moving rapidly into even further is the autonomous swarm era. Now, right now, this technology is not been proven on the battle space where we've seen intelligent drone swarms, what I call a super swarm, which we'll talk about. But we have seen groups of drones working together. And more drones are becoming autonomous. Right now, a lot of the interceptor drones are autonomous. You shoot them up and they go on their own. So autonomy is growing in its capability. Artificial intelligence will coordinate swarms, with minimal human input in the future very soon. And the human operator will be in charge of basically using mission command to designate targets. So the control of drones is really important. Right now, the Ukrainians primarily use one-to-one, where they have one drone operator and one drone. That scale is hard for us. How many drone operators do you think the Ukrainians have? If you have 1 million drones, you don't have 1 million drone operators for sure, because you're not using them all at once. But after some research, I found that they have up to about 50,000 drone operators at any one time operating either in training or on the field. How many drone operators do we have? Do we have 50,000 certified drone operators? I don't think so. So we need to look at a different method. We need to invest more in an AR layer, an artificial intelligence layer that will allow us to have one-to-many control. So we need one operator with dozens of drones, one operator with hundreds of drones, one operator with thousands of drones. Now, this is not impossible. This has just not yet been demonstrated. But we're moving toward that. And of course, you see this kind of thing when you see a drone light show, the same concept. A little bit more complex when you start putting ammunition and weapons on there and all. And we have to think through who's going to arm these, how we're going to supply them, how we're going to maintain them, because this is a whole new infrastructure that we'll need to create. But if the enemy has it and we don't, and they win the LAL and they win the SASL, then we're pretty much screwed because we're going to be hunted and destroyed by their drones. Now, we're all waiting for the silver bullet counter UAS system that will kill them all, but I don't think that will ever happen. There are good systems out there that can do different things. Most of them that are not kinetic take a lot of power and are fixed. Mobile systems are usually a little bit more of a challenge, but there are ways to knock down enemy drones and maybe even knock down swarms of drones. And all of that needs to be part of how we gain control of the LAL. But your question should always be who's fighting to win the LAL for us, and what do they have to win it? Now, one-to-one control, again, in Ukraine works because they're basically making up for AI with their human decision making. And that's one way to do it. And it's a smart way for them to do it. And they're saving manpower by doing it that way. We could do something like that, but we've decided not to for many reasons. We don't have a drone corps. We don't have really good drone training programs. They're ad hoc almost now, or scattered around the Army. But we need to think through how we're going to do this, and our goal should be the one-to-many control approach at some point. Now, we're going to have to transition, so we're going to need both for a while. We're going to need one-to-one control, and then we're also going to need to work on the one-to-many control. But the answer for the U.S. military is going to be one-to-many control. So we need to put our money, our energy, and our minds into that way and figure out how to do it. And then eventually we'll have what is called the super swarm, where you have basically one human operator being able to control ground and air systems. And those systems can be 10, 100, 1,000, as many as you can put in the field. Now, all of these need to be supported. Someone has to arm them. There's ways that we could do that automatically. We could have them all in a box-like system to where we just put out the boxes. They arm on command, they fly on command, they're charged and all that. And then when they move out, there's ways to do this. And we'll figure that out if we, in fact, put in our heads that this is where we need to go. So the super swarm, which is a precise definition, because a swarm is just a gaggle of things. But a super swarm is an AI-enabled swarm, as you see here. And this is where, again, the machines calculate and the humans command. And it will go from point A to point B to point C and kill everything underneath it or in front of it according to its targeting parameters. Again, we're not there yet. There's a lot of things that have to be done before this can happen. And technology is hard, okay? I mean, every little thing is hard. But it gets even harder if we don't try. And we have to think it through and figure out how to do it because our enemies are working on this. The Chinese are the closest to having a super swarm right now, probably than anyone. Now, the whole idea of the super swarm, again, is that you could, in fact, use it as a breakthrough weapon. I mean, imagine in the Ukrainian sense, if they had a super swarm, AI-enabled super swarm commanded by one person, and the whole thing would just go from the breakthrough across the front lines and then into the rear and then wherever they needed it to go. You could create a swath of destruction that would allow you to break through. Now, this is an interesting chart that I want you to look at because this shows where we are versus Ukraine. So US versus Ukraine in our drone warfare capability and the gaps. Biggest thing to take from this is that overall, we are about 3 to 5 years, sometimes even 6 years, behind Ukrainian capability. Now, we can argue with that, and there's many people that would say, no, we're good here, we're there, we're fine. I don't think so. I think this is correct. I believe that 3 to 5 years is right. I know that the thinking 5 years ago, when I was talking about this, was hard to get people to think this way. Now we're thinking more and more. And I've been doing everything I can to try to get people to think forward. But it is a difficult thing for us to get industry to move forward. I mean, for instance, in 2023, we decided we were going to put a 155 millimeter artillery shell production capability into Mesquite, Texas. It still hasn't produced one shell. Total disaster. General Dynamics has screwed it up to no end. So we have to be able to take things from industry and get it quickly there. And we have some great companies like Antal and others that are doing well in being able to get things rapidly done. But first, we need to get our thinking done. First, we as soldiers and leaders need to get our thinking straight to figure out what we need. Otherwise, we'll end up with a bunch of stuff everywhere. And you've seen that before. Okay, so the question you need to ask every night is, are we ready to fight tonight? I believe we're running out of time. I believe there's a war pressing and that we have to be very careful. We're in a war right now, and most people don't even feel like we're at war, but we are. And there's some great advantages to being able to take Iran off the table, and it might save World War III, or it might push, who knows? We don't know what's going to happen. No one knows tomorrow. But we have to be ready for the worst case. So what is the worst case in your mind? And if the worst case could happen, are you ready for it? Are you ready to fight tonight? And of course, in this era of drone dominance, you have to understand there are no sanctuaries. There is no place that you can get away from the drones. My name is Colonel John Antal, U.S. Army retired. My purpose in life is to develop leaders and inspire service. What are your questions? And I'll click off at this briefing.
Thanks, John. Great job. Rachel has been monitoring the chat and the Q&A, so we have a bunch of questions. I know we're running up against time, but I think we're going to try to get through as no worries. We're going to try to get through as many as we can, as long as folks are still here and interested. So, Rachel, let me run it over to you, and you can start asking John the questions.
Sure. All right, sir. So to start us off, our first question is, in your perspective, what is the ranking of the most important development characteristics for research work on drones? Sensor integration, endurance time, extended range, communications, integration AI, etc.
Wow, what a question. Okay, go back over the list again.
Sure. So we've got sensor integration, endurance time, extended range, communications, integration AI, cost.
Okay.
Goes
Yeah,
on.
there's no silver bullet. We're not going to get the drone that does everything, because if we do, it won't do very much well, you know. We're going to need a whole spectrum of capabilities. Short range, long range, high altitude, low altitude. You know, some are going to have to always be able to see in all spectrums that we can make it, and maybe some we don't need to see in every spectrum, you know, because they're going to be a little cheaper and we can just throw them out there. So that it's not a false choice to try to say this is the most important thing. It is an important parameter to look at for every system. But just like we have an integrated air defense system of many systems, we need a drone offense defense capability of many systems. So I hope that answers the question there.
Sure, yeah. So our next question here, how are we doing with the counter drone challenge, assuming offensive and defensive drone challenges are closely linked?
I think we're not doing as well as we'd like to be. The problem we have is that the action, counteraction, you know, reaction, triple action, or quadruple action always occurs in war. You know, there's always act, counteract. So if you have the ability to jam drones with electromagnetic warfare, what does the enemy do? Well, they come up with fiber optic drones. Now you've got fiber optic drones that take fiber optic cable out of the back for 60, 70 kilometers, 60 or 70 kilometers. I mean, there's no limit to the amount of cable that you can put in one of these if you have a big enough system. And they provide almost perfect, clear, clarity, you know, HD video and targeting capability and control. So fiber optic cable is so prevalent in Ukraine that you cannot walk across a field without getting covered in it. I mean, you're wrapped in fiber optic cable. You need to look at the videos. Trucks driving down the road stop because they can't move anymore because their wheels are tied up in fiber optic cable. Now, you might say, well, you know, the Ukrainian front's a kind of a static front. You know, it's a war of attrition. We'll never be involved in that. Don't be so sure. Almost all wars settle into attrition at some phase. I mean, we can go through any war that we fought, and there's times, and we have to break the attrition. We have to break that by having capable mobile forces that can fight in all arms combat. And the concept of all arms combat is really important because we need to integrate at the lowest level now things that were normally integrated at higher levels. And this is difficult because many people say, well, heck, our second lieutenants, they can barely handle what they have now. Well, we need to train them differently. You know, in many cases, we have them for 4 years in a college, and we waste that time dramatically. You know, if a fighter pilot isn't properly trained, they don't put him in the seat. You know, so a tank platoon leader or an infantry platoon leader can't just be an OJT job anymore. You know, war is no longer industrial scale where we're just sending out, you know, untrained troops. Now, the Russians are doing that right now and paying the cost for it. Our army is small and it's much more brittle. We couldn't take the casualties the Russians take. And thankfully, we won't because hopefully we're better. But hope is not a method, so we have to war game this and figure it out. And one of the things that has to happen is that every leader needs to get tougher and smarter about getting his unit, his lane ready for fighting. And we need to be able to ready to fight tonight. And that ought to be your mantra, because if you do not have the ability to fight tonight, well, you haven't done your job. And you say, well, wait a minute, I haven't been given everything. It's not my job to have everything. No, it's your job to get everything done within your lane that you can do. And there's a lot more you can do than we're doing. I mean, for instance, I talk to infantry units that should know better. And I say, you know, there are no sanctuaries. The enemy is going to use drones to fight and kill individual infantrymen. We will have all sorts of counter UAS systems that we will try to fix to do this, but we also need some passive, simple methods. When's the last time you dug in with overhead cover? And the answer is never. And you'll say, no, that's not true. Infantry digs in with overhead cover all the time. Just ask them. And they can't use e-tools to do it either. You know, the Ukrainians can take a piece of ground and turn it into a hard point. And they have picks and shovels to do it. They don't have bulldozers, and they're not using e-tools because e-tools won't work. So these are the little things that we need to do. Other things that we need to do, for instance, how come units don't have battle drills for drone attack? Now, some may, and that's great. Those that do are forward thinking. But you should have a battle drill for a tank, a battle drill for a tank platoon, battle drill for a tank section, a battle drill for an infantry squad, a battle drill for an infantry platoon, a battle drill for a drone attack of a command post, a battle drill for a drone attack of a medical post, of a supply point. All of these need to be thought through. And it's not impossible for us to do this, and it costs no money for leaders to create a battle drill that they practice and get ready to do. For instance, what's the sequence of events? You know, you detect the drone, you alert. What's the next steps? Figure out those steps. When do you pop smoke? How do you shoot back without killing each other? You know, how do you maneuver? You know, does the tank pull its armor, you know, toward the front, toward the threat? Yes. Why would you want to give the enemy your weakest spot to hit? Could they be moving the turret all around? Yes, and the drone would have a harder time hitting you. There's all sorts of things that you can do if we think this through, and we need to war game it. Most importantly, we need to develop a wargaming culture. The Army needs to be a wargaming culture where we wargame all the time. And you say, oh, I've been through lots of war games. I don't mean big, heavy, you know, computerized war games. I'm talking about having a war game at the squad level where they take out a terrain model or a map or a whiteboard and say, you got this, what are we going to do? And you're the living, thinking enemy fighting against the blue force. You know, there's red against blue, and you learn from that. And you do that at every echelon. And you do it impromptu and ad hoc, and you do it without a lot of you know, systems and computers needed. But we could have those. You know, we always talked about a synthetic training environment and all this stuff and spent millions of dollars. And where are we with that? So we have to use our heads. We got to start having leaders who do more and more with this. And you can inspire them to do that. So do it. Anyway, I hope that answers that question. Next one.
All right, sir. Are the days of combined arms maneuver over with what we see on the battlefield since the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict? Is the tank dead, or do we just need to adapt to the threats in the land-air littoral?
Okay, the way we fight now won't work. And that's a hard pill to swallow. We need to disperse more. 4 vehicles together in the battle space is a target that sticks out, and I will hammer it if I'm the enemy with everything I can. So we have got to disperse more. We have to have the ability to fight in real time. We have to have the ability to fight with beyond line of sight weapons. So squads, platoons, tanks, Bradleys, they need beyond line of sight weapons. They need real-time ISR feed from drones. The drones act as the nervous system of all arms combat. So we need to evolve from combined arms to all arms. And all arms combat is going to be a robotic intensive force, because we're in the robotic era now. Let's face it. All of you will have, more robots in your homes in the future. You may have a humanoid robot in your future very soon. Will do the cooking and all sorts of other things for you. I mean, these will cost the price of a small car. So it's getting cheaper. It's going to happen. And we need to have this in the battle space. How can we use humanoid robots, for instance, in the battle space? I can see a lot of uses in logistics, unloading vehicles, loading vehicles. And we could even, for instance, if you wanted to make the M1A2 SEP V3 a 3-man human crewed tank with 1 robot, and with a robotic loader, what you do is you put the robot in the loader station, you train it specifically to load that gun, you charge it right there, and you've got a robotic system that is made for humans in a human-made setup without having to replace the whole system for loading guns. Now, the M1E3 apparently has an automatic loader different, but the older legacy systems, you could update those with humanoid robots. And they could do multiple other tasks. They could do security. If they have thermal vision, they could do all sorts of other things. So this is where we're headed, and we need to really think it through, and you need to wargame it. So that bit about the wargaming culture that I talked about, this is something that folks at TRADOC and all need to really think through, because you can wargame every day. All you have to do is say, okay, today let's talk about humanoid robots. I want, you 5, you think about this, and you 5 play all the reasons why it won't work, and let's put it together and see what we can learn. But that's how we're going to get ahead, by having some creative thought, by wargaming it, red teaming it every chance we get, and making sure that we're not stagnant and not fighting the last war, but thinking ahead. So how do you think ahead? And that's that wargaming culture that will help you do that. Okay, next question.
All right, our next question here is, what do you see that could impact this battlefield framework given the need to operate and dominate in the littoral space? Then we have a couple other follow-on questions after that.
You hit the beginning of that one again.
What do you see that could impact this battlefield framework given the need to operate and dominate in the littoral space?
Well, a lot of things can impact it. Here's the mindset that I think that may answer the question that you need to have. The first question is, who right now has drone superiority in the LAL? So you look at that and you go, do we have a force, a commander with forces that is seizing the LAL for us? Do we have someone who's knocking out the enemy drones, killing the Archer, and putting our drones on them, pinning them to their positions so that we can gain freedom of maneuver? Now, again, you have 3 conditions. The enemy has drone superiority, which is a bad day for you. It is contested, which is still a bad day for you, and you don't have freedom of maneuver. Or you have drone superiority, and you have freedom of maneuver. I mean, we don't even talk about who has drone superiority over the LAL as a condition for maneuver. But it's the condition for maneuver. Otherwise, you end up like the Ukrainians in 2023, moving forward into the kill box, and just everyone gets killed. And you can't even get the wounded out. So we have got to think through how we do this. Our challenge right now is not so much technology. Our challenge is that we're not thinking hard enough about how to solve some of these problems. Now, you have a very smart group of folks here, and many of you are doing tremendous work, and I thank you. And I don't mean to say by any means that you're not working hard. But if any of these things inspire you to think a little harder, do a little bit more homework, understand what's going on in Ukraine and Gaza and Lebanon a little bit better so that we can learn those lessons, then that will help our efforts and that will keep our troops alive. So I challenge you to do that. Next question.
All right, given distributed mission command in real time, What is the impact on the planning and execution timeline at Echelon, especially the vaulted ATO?
Especially the what?
The vaulted ATO.
Well, everything's faster. Our whole concept of the MDMP needs to change. I know that's sacrosanct and it's hard to think through that, but we need to do that. Um, we can't have you can't take hours to create orders anymore. You have to give orders rapidly. Rapid decision making needs to be our mantra, needs to be what we train on all the time. If leaders can't make rapid decisions, we fire them. We fire them. I mean, this is not negotiable. Um, and the way you learn how to do that is war game, war game, war game, war game, under pressure, under time pressure. And not, you don't need, again, big computer systems to do this. You can do this, on a board game. You can do this in a map X. You can do this on a toot, tactical exercise without troops. You walk into the field and say, "You're in charge. You're in charge. What do you do? You're the enemy," and get them to think rapidly. We have to be able to issue orders very rapidly. And of course, we can do this even better with artificial intelligence assisting us, because artificial intelligence can give us some very important stuff. I mean, all of us need to have our battle factors at our elbow, but artificial intelligence can give us that instantly. You know, how many gallons of fuel do we have having already moved, 70 miles? And when do I need to refuel next? Well, that's a calculation that AI can do instantaneously. It would take a human being a few minutes, probably. You can have a rule of thumb to do it, and good commanders know that. But these are the things that are the nitty gritty of leading and winning that we have to get better at doing. We are going to have to fight in degraded mode in many cases. We're going to have to fight outnumbered. We're going to have to fight where the enemy has drone superiority. We're going to have to learn how to mask our forces. Masking isn't even a term that we use, but it should be. Masking is the full spectrum, multi-domain effort to deceive enemy sensors and disrupt enemy targeting. We should be able to train our soldiers on that. Ask a simple question of any unit commander. How many hours this year did your soldiers spend in camouflage training? And of course, they would say, well, we do camouflage training all the time, every time we go to the field, so hours and hours. No, I'm not talking about going to the field and just putting some leaves on your helmet. I'm talking about who's talking the science to the troops and telling them what they need to do right. And what about thermal? How do you hide from thermal sights? You can do it. You just have to think through. You have to have the capability, and you got to practice. You have to practice. And that drone, blue drone flying above you all the time in thermal, getting a thermal view of you, wouldn't that be valuable for after action reviews and to enhance your training? What about, hiding in the acoustic range? How noisy are we? Drones can pick up noise, pick up sounds, and they can triangulate on the sounds. So, an electromagnetic, the electromagnetic arena. How many of us have units that allow people to bring cell phones to the field? Can't do that. If you don't have the discipline to have your soldiers not bring their cell phones to the field, how are you going to have the discipline to win in battle? I mean, the enemy will see that cell phone instantly. Cell phones are crying out all the time. Here I am. Where are you? Here I am. Where are you? To the cell tower. And all they have to do is listen for that, and they know how to target you. Now, some people have said, well, what if everybody has them on? Everybody brings them. There are needles in a stack of needles. Yeah, okay. Talk to the Russians at Makivka. They lost almost 890 dead in one strike because all the Russian soldiers were talking on New Year's Eve to their relatives, and the Ukrainians picked it up. We need to think this through. So we need to mask in many different arenas, and that's part of the things that we need to start being really hard on as leaders to train people with. So when you talk about, the changes in warfare, the tank is not dead, combined arms is not dead. It needs to evolve. We need to move it into a different arena. Leadership is still vital. Warfare is still a human endeavor. We need to train harder in the key things and understand the battle space. So how many videos have you seen from the Ukrainian war about how they're fighting? How many videos have you seen of the Israeli Defense Forces on how they're fighting? How many lessons do you have in your hip pocket that you could pull out any time to train your soldiers with that says, hey, this is what happened at this battle. This is what happened at this battle. You know, this is what Bakhmut was like, and this is the lesson that I think you can learn. And let's go over this on a map. Wouldn't that be interesting? You see, we're professional soldiers. We need to be absolutely understand. We need to understand our practices, our skills so well, so that we can coach, teach, and mentor everyone else. The politicians don't have time for this. The civilians aren't going to do it. We're the guys. We've got to do this. So we have to know war. So do you know war today? Or do you know war from some distant past? There's nothing wrong with studying military history. There's a lot of advantages to doing that, and I recommend it, especially for its aspects on leadership, because that is something that is, that'll happen, that lasts throughout the ages. But now we need to understand the special conditions we live in and how this technological age is changing it. And we're moving into an era of robotic warfare. And yes, we can take away the enemy's electrons and end up fighting with bayonets and rocks at some point. But until that happens, we have to use every weapon at our disposal to win well. And one of the things we need to do is understand the enemy will as well. They will do that. And our major enemy, the Chinese, the People's Liberation Army, they would love to catch us when we're not ready. And we don't want to let that happen. Next question.
All right, John, we have time for, I think, one more. I appreciate everybody staying on.
Great.
So, Rachel, go ahead.
All right, sir. Our last question here. As UAS swarms transition away from centralized control towards decentralized edge computed autonomy, we face an immediate crisis in both data processing and magazine depth. From a technical and operational standpoint, how do we successfully merge multi-sensor data at the edge to predict collective swarm intent while simultaneously democratizing affordable, high-capacity countermeasures down to standard maneuver formations so that the force can absorb and defeat these massed attacks?
Yeah, the answer to that is the digital architecture. The digital architecture that we should have from squad level on up, and practicing that, there's lots of ways that we could do digital war games through our digital architecture, putting up, phantom drones when there are no drones just for training. There's a lot of things we could do that could do that. But if you really want to answer that question, you need to study the Ukrainian Delta and the Kurpova setup and learn about it. And if you don't know anything about it, start, because that's a great place to learn. And the Israeli Defense Forces Syed system, this is something also that is extremely valuable, because it allows them to use the drones as part of a digital nervous system that gives them all the information, gives them tons of information that they can use. Let me not put tons, relevant information that they can use, the most important information that they can use, and then have AI sift through that information is the next step, so that you get just pertinent information to you. For instance, we all know that if you want to do cross-domain maneuver in MDO, you need to understand the maneuver you're going to cross-domain into. And it'd be great to know all domains. So if there's the 5 domains we've discussed in MDO, how do you see the space domain if you're a ground commander? And do you need to? Well, it would be really good to know if space is working for you or against you. For instance, if you had a simple indication of sort of green, amber, red, black, if you wake up and you say, okay, how are we doing in space? Just to be, just figuring out what's going on. I don't have any space forces. I'm just a battalion commander here, but, what's up? Oh, space is black. The enemy took it out. Holy moly. What does that mean? Suddenly we don't have all sorts of things that we're used to. So we need to figure out how to look at all of these things in a simple, holistic leadership way. Use AI to pattern recognition that in a way that leaders can take. And then we need to really start getting serious about training our leaders from the beginning. We can't waste their time anymore. We can't send them to a school for 4 years and they learn basically how to be a gentleman. They need to learn a lot more, and they need to learn really how to fight. And at some point, we need to really focus on what is key. For instance, what do you master? What do you familiarize with? And what do you just kind of know about? There's very few things that our leaders master in our school system. They need to do that. We need to have something that we master. They ought to be good at decision making, for instance. They ought to master rapid decision making. Imagine if that was our goal and what it would take to do that. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, and I want to thank you for listening. If I can help in any way, contact me, and you can reach me in many different ways. JohnAntal.com is one way, but contact me and I'll see if I can help you or your unit or assist you in your unit in any way I can. Thank you.
John, thanks so much. This was awesome. I know we ran a little over time, but I think everybody stayed with us, and that's great to see because there were a lot of questions. There were still a lot more in the chat there. So, as John said, please do reach out to me if you have further questions. We have recorded this. Check back to the MadSci blog at madSciblog.t2com.army.mil, and you can watch the recording of it, and you can get updates on when our next speaker series will be for next month with Dr. James Giordano. So John Antal, once again, thank you so much for talking to us today. You've been a great friend of the program, always here to inform us and always here to help us, help make us better. And you hinted that there's a part 2 to this. So maybe, in the near future, we'll get the second half of this and we'll invite everybody back. So thanks again, John.
All right. Thank you very much. Be ready to fight tonight. Hua.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Out here.